Wake up, Link.
The wild era of Zelda that we first got a glimpse of back in 2014 seems to finally be coming to an end, with Age of Imprisonment marking what I assume is the last big adventure in this version of Hyrule. And while I love this iteration of the franchise, I'm also extremely ready to move on. Breath of the Wild is my favorite game of all time, but at this point I don't have any desire to spend more time with this art style and world since it's been such a huge focus for so long. As a series that constantly reinvents itself every couple of years, it's felt a bit strange to see The Legend of Zelda stuck in one place like this. But it's not surprising given the unprecedented success of these games, especially when compared to the rest of the series. Of course, there have been great games like the Link's Awakening remake and Echoes of Wisdom that kept things feeling fresh along the way, but it seems like everyone is expecting a pretty big shakeup with the next big 3D entry. So naturally, I've been thinking a lot about when the next era of Zelda will begin and what it will look like, despite it still being way too early to expect it anytime soon. I have a lot of thoughts, predictions, and hopes for where this legendary franchise will go next, and I'll be sharing all of them with you today. Let the baseless speculation begin. Let's start with the release timing of the next big 3D adventure. The most recent amount of time between the releases of 3D Zelda games was just over 6 years, which was the longest in the series yet. But with Tears of the Kingdom, there was a global pandemic right in the middle of development, which surely slowed things down. However, they were also reusing a lot of the assets and the entire map of the previous game, which likely cut down on the amount of time needed. In my head, these two big factors sort of cancel each other out, so I'm guessing the next game will probably take roughly the same amount of time, seeing as how they'll be building an entirely new game from the ground up this time, but also aren't working against a worldwide shutdown. 6 years between games is an extremely long time to wait, but I think that's just the reality of making such massive open-ended experiences that are so graphically and mechanically intensive. But I'm feeling a bit optimistic and think it'll weirdly somehow end up being a smaller amount of time than Tears of the Kingdom took. My best guess is that the game will be revealed in mid-2027 for an early 2028 release date, and then get delayed into late 2028 as so often happens with these games. However, I think it's very possible that it could get delayed even further into 2029. Hopefully Nintendo has been working behind the scenes to streamline their development strategies to not keep everyone waiting too long. But a last-second delay into the spring of 2029 is a very real possibility. So my official prediction is that the next 3D Zelda will be released sometime between November of 2028 and March of 2029. And if that doesn't end up happening, feel free to come back to this video and leave an angry comment. So if the next 3D Zelda is that far away, what will come out in the meantime? Nintendo generally likes to release one Zelda-related title per year, so that leaves a few empty slots before the new Link's big debut. I think what makes the most sense is a remake of a 3D game and a new 2D game. And since we just got Echoes of Wisdom in 2024, a remake of a past 3D Zelda game makes the most sense as being in line for next year. Of course, there's the long-rumored and discussed ports of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess HD, and those would make sense as titles meant to hold over Zelda fans while they work on the next game. However, if this is going to finally happen, I think it would have to be relatively soon. There's no reason these games wouldn't also be put on Switch 1, and with recent statements from the president of Nintendo saying that they're focusing primarily on the Switch 2 going forward, they would have to be right around the corner or nearly finished already. Wind Waker is also technically already on Switch 2 through Switch Online, and Twilight Princess could be added in the future as well, which does sort of hurt the chances of these games coming. And while I'd love to see the HD versions of these fantastic games be available to a wider audience, I do feel like the Switch 2 is missing a big, exciting, and graphically impressive showcase for the Legend of Zelda series, and ports of Wii U games wouldn't really do that. So my other guess is that they'll do a big fancy remake of Ocarina of Time. I don't mean to alarm you, but it's been longer since the 3DS remake of this game than the amount of time between that game and the N64 original, so I don't think it's too soon for this game to show up again in a big way. And since it's a relatively simple game at its core, it would be a great pick to showcase the impressive graphical capabilities of the Switch 2 with a total overhaul of the visuals. Now I know I have problems with the current remake culture going on in gaming too, and it's possible that I'd end up preferring the 3DS remake over a visually busy new 4K version, but there's no denying how popular this announcement and game would be. So my prediction for the next Zelda release in 2026 is either the HD versions of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess put on both Switch 1 and 2, or a full remake of Ocarina of Time exclusively on Switch 2. So what about 2027? Well, I think that's where a 2D Zelda game would fit in nicely. I could see it being a remake of an older title like the Oracle games or A Link to the Past, but I'd love to see another brand new 2D game similar to Echoes of Wisdom but with a totally new art style. I really enjoyed the unique gameplay style of Echoes, but there is also a part of me that missed the more classic style of sword combat and item-specific puzzle solving from the older 2D games. So this could be a great way for a new Zelda game to truly feel like a classic one in terms of structure and vibes, with a totally fresh new look and feel that would set it apart from the rest of the series. The Legend of Zelda movie is coming out this year as well, so I think a brand new 2D game would tie in better with the movie than something like the Oracle remakes would. Sort of similar to how the Mario movie was followed by Wonder back in 2023. But either way, I think 2027 will bring a new 2D Zelda game, whether it's a remake or a totally new adventure. Now let's switch back to talking about the next big 3D game, as there's obviously a ton of exciting possibilities here. To start, we can assume that this game is going to follow in the footsteps of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom by continuing the open and free-feeling formula that was established in 2017, with Aonuma even vaguely saying as much in an interview from 2023. So the question then becomes just how similar will the games be? Since Tears was a direct follow-up to Breath of the Wild, we don't really know how closely they'll be sticking to this new formula or what elements will carry over. The hopeful side of me can't imagine that they'll be too similar, as it was the desire to break conventions and go in a new direction that made the Wild era so great in the first place. However, Tears of the Kingdom was a very iterative game in terms of its structure and gameplay style, so I guess that is the direction the series has been heading in recently. Of course, I can only speak for myself, but if the next game features a huge amount of shrines spread across the world that give you a small collectible you need 4 of to upgrade your stats with, or 4 main regions that all have local unnatural phenomena going on that you have to solve, I would be a bit disappointed. By the time this game comes out, it will have been over a decade of that gameplay style, so I really hope they shake things up a decent amount. I think they should move in the direction of having more large and substantial dungeons that give you more meaningful rewards like a useful item instead of just a single spirit orb or blessing of light. The gradual piece-by-piece gameplay style of the Wild games has become pretty tiresome over time, and while I do genuinely think it works great for those games, it would really start to get old if the next game has the exact same setup again. I know it's been said 1,000 times, but having more classically structured and themed dungeons would do a lot to make this game feel like an exciting improvement. I want them to be an hour plus in length, and not just have a few terminals that you have to activate. Tears of the Kingdom's temples were a step in the right direction in terms of theming, but structure and puzzle-wise I actually liked the Divine Beasts more. I think a lot of this comes down to items, as both of the Wild games chose to give Link all of the tools he needs at the very beginning with no real substantial additions later on in the game. And no, I don't personally count the Spirit Companions or this clunky robot thing as substantial additions. The older games had a system of each dungeon having an item connected to it, which was getting old by the time Skyward Sword rolled around, but I don't think it should be left behind entirely. It's a cool idea to have Link get everything he needs right from the start, but it limits the game design a lot in terms of dungeons and rewards. The best part about making it through an old Zelda dungeon isn't the heart container you get at the end, but the fact that you now have a bow and arrow or a hookshot that changes the way you interact with the world. And I don't think the items even have to be found in the dungeons themselves, and can instead be found in the surrounding area out in the open world, similar to the Zora armor in Breath of the Wild. I still think Link should have the ability to climb, but it could be a bit more limited in certain areas to make items like the hookshot a real possibility. I just want there to be a more solid sense of progression over the course of the game, with there being more classic items you find in dungeons or out in the open world that meaningfully expand Link's movement and combat options. It would mean the game is less open and free right from the start, but I think that's totally worth the trade-off. I'm incredibly excited to get to explore a totally new map in a 3D Zelda game that I've never seen before, whether it's called Hyrule or something else entirely. But I hope they rein it in terms of the scale and size of the world. I would love a smaller, more intentional map that's more dense with interesting locations. The depths were kind of my breaking point in terms of scale just for the sake of it, as this massive location is mostly uninteresting and full of repeated content and collectibles. I think the base Breath of the Wild map is a great size, but a slightly smaller world could be even better. One thing I think could be really cool is getting to explore the ocean surrounding Hyrule, which would help set it apart from the previous map. One of the biggest critiques of the Wild games is all the empty space in between meaningful locations, and the ocean could be the perfect way to have those larger gaps feel more cohesive. There's also the possibility of underwater exploration, which would suddenly turn all those empty stretches of sea into a second explorable layer below the surface. I can easily see there being a massive water dungeon at the bottom of the ocean, or a version of Zora's domain that's actually underwater since these fish people really shouldn't be living on land anyways. Now I don't envision an ocean-focused map full of lots of tiny islands like the Wind Waker had, but instead a few really big islands that are substantial in scale and full of diverse environments. And with a map roughly similar in size to Breath of the Wild's, I think that's totally possible. Here's a very primitive and rushed concept of the map I made in Paint.net, which shows how this map could feel different and fresh compared to the Hyrule we've had for so many years now. And the thing that could tie all this together is a strong set of sailing mechanics and a way to slowly upgrade your boat over the course of the game. Link could start out with a tiny, slow, and easily destroyed raft that can't take you too far unless you're really determined. But as you explore the open world, you find ways to upgrade and expand your boat into a more capable form of transportation. This would not only introduce a fun new way to travel, but also open the door for so many fun rewards in terms of ship upgrades. Combat encounters out on the open sea seems like a situation with near endless potential, and would make sailing feel entirely different from exploring on land. The modern 3D games have had a big focus on both physics and weather, which would both go perfectly with the ocean. I think having a boat that reacts realistically to the waves would be super impressive in a way that only Zelda can pull off, with events like a big storm making the waves change in size and intensity. And maybe this could be applied to different environments as well, like building a sand ship to travel in the desert or a giant sled to make it through a snowstorm. As long as all these forms of traveling feel like a natural part of the world and aren't held together with bright green glue. I could go on about this for a while, but I think you get the idea. Another aspect of the older games that I hope comes back is Link having a home village at the start of the game. Kokiri Forest, Outset Island, Ordon Village, and Skyloft are some of my all-time favorite locations in the series, largely because they serve as Link's hometown that he has an emotional connection to. I love how Breath of the Wild broke so many conventions of the series to start something totally fresh and new, but losing that sense of setting out on an adventure from your hometown is something that I really miss. And having a location full of characters that you connect with early on does so much for the narrative. That leads into another one of my hopes, that the story will be a more active and involved experience with more memorable moments and characters. It was incredibly deflating when I found out that the majority of Tears of the Kingdom's cutscenes were once again flashbacks from a time long past. I want Link and Zelda to be at the center of a conflict that is currently going on right now in the present, as I think it would make the story so much more engaging. It's time to have a Link that actually shows some more emotion and communicates with the people around him. I don't think the player and Link should be any more clued into the mysteries of the story than all the other characters are. And I'd love to see Zelda have a more active role in the narrative as well, without feeling like a burden to the player. I think it's too early to have another version of Ganondorf, so I'd like to see an entirely new villain who has understandable motivations and desires beyond just wanting to rule because that's what a king does. It's true that Zelda stories have never been the most complex or involved in the industry, but I really don't buy into the idea that Zelda narratives have and always will be bad. You can say a lot with just a few essential scenes or lines of dialogue, as games like The Wind Waker or Majora's Mask have proven. I would be really shocked if they kept the memory format for a third time, so here's hoping this one will actually happen. And now we've arrived at the topic of weapon durability. While I'm mostly in the camp of thinking the next game should take more cues from classic Zelda, I actually don't think weapon durability should be cut. I don't think it's perfect in its current form, but it still has the potential to be really great. The amount of time before a weapon breaks needs to be way higher, so that by the end of the game you aren't burning through weapons so fast on tough enemies. I know a lot of people have suggested a weapon repairing or upgrading system, but I think that would end up having players just sticking to one sword and having to travel to a shop every time it's about to break, and that would get repetitive fast. Speaking of weapons, I'd like to see a few new types of them to freshen up the gameplay. Instead of only 3 main types, maybe it could be increased to 5 or 6, just to give the player more options in terms of combat. Maybe some unlockable skills too. I don't really want to see the fusing system come back, or at least not in the way it was in Tears of the Kingdom. Having some random rusted sword attached to the jaw of a Colgera is not exactly my idea of a cool weapon, and I very much miss the simpler weapon designs of Breath of the Wild. Another big change I'd like to see is a total redesign of how menus work, with less clicking through items that bring the gameplay to a total standstill. Monster Hunter and Souls games have great systems of using items in real time, which increase the intensity of combat and stop you from being able to pause and refill all your health the second you get hit. Boss fights would be a lot more fun and engaging with real-time item usage, and even your average combat encounter would feel a lot better without pausing to attach a shock fruit to your arrow. And as a last hope for the next 3D game, I'd love for it to have a totally fresh and new vibe that feels entirely different from the Wild era. I mean, I love the imagery of broken down ruins in the middle of a big grassy field, but it's really time to move on and go in a totally different direction. Getting to run around a fully alive and functioning new version of Hyrule Castletown full of NPCs and shops would be amazing, so I hope the old ruined aesthetic is mostly retired for the next phase of Zelda. It might sound crazy considering how much rambling I just did, but this was all just scratching the surface of my thoughts about the future of the Legend of Zelda series. I could truly talk about this topic forever, but that should cover most of it for now. Of course, my attempts to try and identify patterns and predict the future will most likely be entirely wrong, as it's truly impossible to predict what Nintendo will do next. I really have no idea what's on the horizon for this series, but I can't wait to see what they've been working on no matter how long it takes. And who knows, maybe the next game will finally be the one that unites the entire fanbase and isn't controversial or divisive in the slightest. Okay, yeah, that's my most unrealistic hope yet.